President Trump has said he will impose harsh sanctions on Iraq if the government there tries to make US forces leave the country. The Iraqi parliament called for foreign troops to leave the country. The US president has told reporters, "We have a very extraordinarily expensive air base that's there. It cost billions of dollars to build. We're not leaving unless they pay us back for it." In neighbouring Iran, meanwhile, mourners have packed the streets of the capital Tehran as the body of the senior Iranian military commander was returned. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei led prayers and at one point was seen weeping. Tensions between the United States and Iran have escalated dramatically after President Trump ordered the killing of Qasem Soleimani. He was killed by a US drone strike as he travelled in a convoy in Iraq near Baghdad's international airport. Iran has declared 3 days of mourning and has threatened severe revenge for the killing. Previously, President Trump has defended his actions on Twitter, saying the general was plotting to kill many more Americans and was responsible for the deaths of millions of people. The Secretary General of the United Nations says leaders need to exercise maximum restraint. Last night, Boris Johnson, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron issued a joint statement. They are all calling on all parties to exercise utmost restraint and responsibility and say the current cycle of violence in Iraq must be stopped. The statement continues, "We stand ready to continue our engagement with all sides in order to try to diffuse tensions and restore stability to the region." It comes as Iran announced it will no longer abide by the restrictions of the 2015 nuclear deal. The former Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt has warned of the peril being faced.
What we have at the moment is a very dangerous tinderbox situation because both sides are fundamentally underestimating the strength and resolve on the other side. The Iranians have thought for some time that America just wants to get out of the Middle East and is not really committed long-term to the region and they can get away with their proxy wars. But the Americans too have been predicting for a long time that Iran will come to its knees because of economic pressure, and the regime has held out, and that is the real danger that we face at the moment, that risk of unintended consequences, because neither side wants a war. I don't think there will be a war, but both sides will feel the need to retaliate when they're attacked.
The former Foreign Secretary Lina Sinjab is our correspondent in Beirut.
Hundreds of thousands took to the streets over the past few days and today, and will continue for final burial of Qasem Soleimani in his hometown in Kerman. We've seen also today the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei leading the prayers and weeping over the body of Qasem Soleimani. This is a man of power. This is a man of icon and a leader who is seen by the Shia community in Iran and across the region as an icon who defended their own interest. He's someone who shaped the politics and the presence and influence of Iran across the region. This is time of mourning and grief, but also of anger against American administration who conducted this assassination, but also probably a time of reflection and thinking ahead of how to respond to regain their pride and reinforce their presence and power in the region.
Lina Sinjab reporting. I'm going to speak in a moment to Professor Fawaz Gerges, who's a Middle East expert at the London School of Economics, joining us live from Kuwait. Let's also take a look at the pictures coming in from Iran of that funeral procession. As we speak, thousands and thousands of people out on the streets of Tehran. The funeral takes place today, and then the remains of the General Qasem Soleimani will go to Qom, one of the centres of Shia Islam, tomorrow for a ceremony ahead of a burial in his hometown of Kerman. Well, Fawaz Gerges, thank you very much for joining us. How fragile is the situation at the moment?
It's extremely risky and dangerous. Both sides are locked in a cycle of escalation and counter-escalation. The entire region really is on edge. Even America's allies, where I am, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, are extremely quiet. They were not consulted about the attacks. They're anxious about being in the line of fire. The question is not whether Iran will retaliate, but when and how. And the consensus in the region that this will be a multifaceted, very significant retaliations. The Iranians are talking about hitting American targets. Keep in mind, for your audience, where I am in Kuwait, you have many American military bases in Kuwait, in Bahrain, in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar. You have almost 60,000 American troops here, not to mention the ships and the naval armada. It's highly dangerous, and the preemptive move by President Trump did not take into account not only the unintended consequences, but also the determination of Iran and its allies in the region to retaliate.
Seeing the number of people out on the streets of Tehran gives an indication as to the affection with which he was regarded in Iran. Tell us more about Qasem Soleimani and why he is such an enormous figure there.
No, Joanna, we have not seen, almost millions of people, not just in the past few days, in many Iranian cities, in Iraq, in Lebanon. He is seen as an iconic symbol of resistance and martyrdom, an image he cultivated in the past 20 or 30 years. He was the architect of Iranian expansion in the region, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Syria. He is seen in particular as a symbol of resistance to the Americans and the Israelis in particular. He was not just a military commander. He was also the second most powerful man in Iran. And many Iranians believe, even the ones who oppose the government, and I've spoken to many Iranians, they think that this was an attack against Iranian dignity, Iranian prestige and pride. And his killing, far from really weakening Iran, it has united Iranians. It has given the Iranian government space because it was under tremendous pressure inside as a result of the economic sanctions imposed by Trump. So the calculations that President Trump based on his decision to kill Soleimani were not only wrong, but terribly misguided. Americans are no longer safe in this part of the world. The potential for war has become much higher. Iran now is as strong as ever, and Iranian allies are bracing themselves for retaliations against the Americans. So, when the U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo says that Iraqis and Iranians are dancing in the streets in celebration of the killing of Soleimani, it's all wishful thinking, ideological nonsense. It tells you a great deal about the thinning out of the American decision-making process. President Trump, and with all humility, has surrounded himself with second and third raters, yes men. And that's why the mistakes and the blunders that President Trump seems to be getting himself into.
Ayatollah Khamenei has been leading the prayers at this funeral procession in Tehran. He has been seen weeping at that ceremony. He, of course, is going to be the person who will be weighing up Iran's response. Do you believe war is inevitable? Can it be avoided?
Of course it can be avoided, but you need adults in the room. Where are the adults in the room? Where is the role of the UK? Where is the European Union? Where are the European nations? They have become more passive. Donald Trump seems to have paralyzed the role of Europe, in particular the UK. You would expect the UK, being very close to the United States, to really voice some criticism, because it risks not only American interests, it risks Western interests and British interests. There are British forces in the region and British interests, and the gravity of the situation. Remember, this was an assassination. You're talking about, regardless of what you think of Soleimani, he was a military commander. He was engaged in paramilitary activities. And yes, he helped the Iraqis to kill American soldiers after the American invasion and occupation of Iraq. But let's remind our audience that basically what were the Americans doing in Iraq? in 2003, 2007? Who invited the Americans to Iraq? Did they have any legal cover? The ethical question that's involved, Soleimani was involved in the fight against ISIS from 2014 to 2017. He was in the same trenches as the international coalition fighting ISIS. I'm not defending Soleimani. Soleimani was a bad guy. But the reality is you cannot conduct foreign policy by assassination. And that's why Europe and the UK, I hope the UK, steps forward and plays a positive role given its close relation to the United States. So far, the adults in the room are nowhere to be seen, with the exception of tentative efforts by Oman and by the French president and by the Japanese, but without a concerted effort on the part of Europe to step in, to try to really help the two sides climb down from the trees. I fear that the chances of war in the Middle East are probably 55 or 60% at this particular moment, because the Iranians are going to retaliate. And we know that Trump had threatened to basically escalate his retaliation. And this is a recipe for miscalculation and a wider conflict in the region that not only impacts the region, but world peace and harmony as well.
Fawaz Gerges, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks.